then yeah, I give back to you for the first presentation.
Yes, so welcome everybody to our first presentation. Yeah, we are today listening to 5 presentations in general, and we have asked the speakers to limit their presentations to 10, no more than 15 minutes, to not have just presentation and then no time for discussion. So it would be really nice if all of the participants listen carefully and give feedback in the chat rooms, also the other presenters, to make it a little bit more interesting in this new digital world. And our first presentation will be by Dr. Jens Marquardt, who is a research fellow at TU Darmstadt. He also worked at Stockholm University, and he is a political scientist focusing on environmental governance and science and technology studies. Yeah, but you can also say some more words to yourself. We would enjoy if there's some way of profile or LinkedIn connection that people can contact you later on about your research. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Julia. Do you hear me? Thanks, Livio, and thanks for having me in the session. I'm trying to share my screen, which works hopefully. Okay, I hope you now see the presentation. If not, please scream, because, well, I only see this now. I don't see your faces anymore, which feels weird. So I'm just sitting in my home office and speaking to a screen.
Yes, we make it full screen if possible.
I made it full screen.
Okay, it's not full screen.
Okay. So you just see the
notes.
Well, this is really professional, but okay, let's start.
No, it works. The follows. Everyone has to make it full screen, his or herself. So at the right bottom of the screen, there you can select full screen or tiled or thumbnail, and you have to select full screen to see the presentation. Yeah, full screen.
Okay, and you see now the presentation mode now?
No, not the you have to start the presentation, I guess, in PowerPoint, and then I hope it works.
Which I did, so it's just showing up on my screen. Wait, I'll do it differently. I'll do it. Sorry, I just share my screen and not the application, and then I'll see what happens then. Because now you see yourself. Now you open this, and now I open that. Does that work?
Awesome.
That works. Wonderful. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Sorry for these technical hassles. What I would like to present today is not really project related, and it's more like a bit more than a hobby, I would say. But it's something which I'm kind of throwing in now without having a proper empirical basis for that. But I would love to take this opportunity to get some discussion out of that and some ideas and feedback on the use of socio-technical imaginaries to have a more critical understanding of the German energy transition and mobilize this framework in a way to capture the different ways and different interpretation of what this energy transition is about and what it means for future development of the German society, of politics, of power relations, and so on. So the starting point is something that is not new, and I've seen, I think Timothy Moss was in the audience, and others have pointed out this kind of critical idea of the energy transition that it is much more than just changing the energy system. So my starting argument is here that if we have a closer look at the history of the Energiewende, that it reveals competing and almost implacable visions of the future. And these run from revolutionary alternative imaginations of society to more technocratic ideals and reforms that manifest the status quo of social order. And the problem I have with this is that narrowing down the Energiewende to clean technologies, jobs, and wealth creation, or wealth, can be framed as a powerful and hostile takeover of the term, which reshapes our ability to reimagine not only the future of the energy system, but also the future of society at large. So the problem of kind of focusing on technologies is here at the core, which I would like to unpack a bit. 3 simple steps. First, well, unpack these kind of contested visions, these contradictions, these kind of these ambiguities of the Energiewende term, then look into or applying socio-technical imaginaries to the Energiewende, and then wrap up with some very preliminary conclusions, I would say. So when should we start when we talk about the energy transition? And one easy option would be to go back to 2011 and look after Fukushima's the federal government's decision to phase out nuclear just again. And when Angela Merkel, for example, here presents one way of framing the energy transition. So she said, due to time, I just start with the second paragraph. As a country, we are renowned for new technologies, the spirit of pioneers, and the highest art of engineering. Being the land of ideas, we make visions of the future come true with sincerity, accuracy, and responsibility for future generations. Which country, if not ours, has the power to do this? Well, the energy transition. So very strong focus on technologies, on the possibilities through technology to have a cleaner, but not a different society as such. And this is a contrast to another perspective that goes back to the 1970s and the new social movements. And what we see here are protests in Weil and Baden-Württemberg that prevented the construction of a nuclear power plant in the early 1973, I think it was. And that has had very different ideas of society and politics attached to this protest. So that the peace movement, anti-nuclear movement, environmental movement are kind of merged together to protest against this this power plant. And again, we have two very different ideas and different visions of the future related to this nuclear power plant. One was a very, very short comment here. Without the nuclear power plant in Weil, the first lights will go out at the end of this decade. So it's a necessity. There is no alternative. To have prosperity, to have economic development, we need nuclear power. Whereas on the other hand, or on the other side, there's Robert Jung and others. He was most famous for his book on the Atomstaat, that only those who believe in the illusion of a nuclear future can exclude all dangers of abuse. The vision of perfect internal security is a pure wishful dream. So we see already the struggle when we talk about the future and future imaginaries related to nuclear power are not really compatible. So just to give some snapshots that further illustrate this diversity of what kind of future visions are attached to the Energiewende or the energy transition. Famous work by Ernst Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, also published the same year as we just saw the protests in 1973, who says that, basically criticizes the idea of, or also the endeavor of science and technology leading, naturally to a better society, and he more fosters an idea of a society where with small ways of energy production, for example, and livelihood are being favored, and not against nature, but rather with nature. Then is the famous Energiewende, a book in 1980. By Krause, Bossel, and Reisman, that provide a first very comprehensive scenario for alternative energy futures without oil and without natural gas. No gas, without nuclear and oil. Sorry. And they also provided a kind of radical alternative to the existing energy system, but less so in terms of societal change. And finally, where we see kind of a takeover from the federal government by then Environmental Minister Norbert Röttgen at the same year, which we just saw the quote by Angela Merkel, who again pushes this idea of the Energiewende as a term and frames it as a term that summarizes the technological leadership or idea of engineering, craftsmanship, German engineering, ideal that combines clean technologies with economic growth, and which I think was very interesting. He argues that in doing so, it lets a decade-long societal conflict come to an end. So his idea of this Energiewende has finally reached a point of consensus, at least of mainstream consensus, to end this conflict between the Greens and the others. All right, so talking about the Greens, what do we make of it, and how can we embed these different ideas, these kind of snapshots of the Energiewende into broader societal development? And one option, definitely not the only one, and I think one illustrative option is to look into the Green Party's different political programs and their ideas of what a society should look like. And so to look into their party programs at different points of time. Maybe just do this. So in 1980, shortly after the foundation of the Greens, the first program was of course super critical of nuclear energy, but linked it to say it is a threat to democracy and security risk, which leads to police and surveillance in the surveillance state. So this kind of technological ideal of nuclear was linked to the negative impacts of technology in other parts of society as well. And maybe the last point on democracy again is that there was a strong demand for more autonomous rights for citizens instead of a centralized administration, and which in the energy sector would mean small, decentralized, publicly run, self-administered energy projects. Fast forward to 1998, so the year when the Greens, well, after that election, entered into a government, in the federal government with the Social Democrats, or led by the Social Democrats. There was quite a different framing. It was not that we would call it not that fundamental anymore. So it was more on the pragmatic side of Energiewende terms. So the green energy transition was framed as protecting the climate, creating new jobs, so positive associations with that. In terms of economy, there was the first time this idea was formulated of sustainable economic development. So growth was not entirely being seen as negative. And in terms of principle, in terms of democracy, principles of solidarity, equal rights, protection of civil rights, and expansion of democracy were related to energy transition projects. And again, I'm just running through this now a bit. Fast forward to 2013, we have again a completely different idea of framing of the energy transition, or kind of what priorities come to mind when we look into the party program. And I think what is interesting, just one point for democracy that is where it was nicely put, that yes, of course, there is a need for more democracy, for transparency and participation when it comes to energy projects, but also with clear limits. So there are kind of, in this party program, you already see a struggle between different ideas of how much democratized should the energy transition be, where we see overall from the 1980s to 2013 a sterile a move towards more pragmatically oriented, technologically focused understandings of the energy transition, and less radical, if you want to say. Okay, so why is this important? Just 2 more slides. I have no idea how I'm on time, so please interrupt me if I'm behind schedule. I think it's important because of 3 reasons. The first one is that the energy transition represents an essentially contested concept, which is, comes back to the beginning of my presentation. And what I mean is that what we define as an energy transition is interrelated with the future we imagine. So the way we can imagine a different future of society is intrinsically linked to how we define the energy transition. And who defines that, and who claims authority over today's understanding of the energy transition, of the framing of the discourse behind it, of perceptions, also shapes the way we can imagine the future of society at large. And that, it's interrelated points here. The third point speaks to that talking about visions of the future related to the energy transition or the Energiewende goes beyond, very much beyond transforming the energy system, but also includes issues of broader societal importance, power relations, and so on. Final step now would be to turn to socio-technical imaginaries and think about how we can mobilize this concept in a way that it sheds light and well, illuminates these competing, contrasting, conflicting ideas of the future related to the Energiewende. And I'm basically relying here on well, of course, on Justin and Kim's work on socio-technical imaginaries, and also particularly on Kim's work on nuclear imaginaries in South Korea, where he juxtaposes dominant imaginaries with critical discontent. So he looks at what is the kind of mainstream institutionalized dominant well, state-led idea of nuclear imaginary, and here we can apply to the Energiewende. And I basically don't want to go through all of these aspects now. We can discuss this later on. But he uses some, what I would say, very practical, useful categories to capture this the complexity of imaginaries. We might discuss if this is too much narrowed down. And doesn't give justice to the concept, but I find it very useful to think about competing ideas of the future attached to a term like the Energiewende, or to a concept like the Energiewende. And he distinguishes between what kind of future vision is being laid out, how can we achieve it, what is the role of planning in this. So, for example, is the future very much predefined through large-scale planning, long-term scenarios, or is there radical disruptions that are not plannable due to high levels of uncertainty? What kind of social needs should be addressed, or societal needs should be addressed? Is it affordability, reliability of energy, jobs, wealth creation, or is it the redistribution of wealth? Is it about environmental consciousness? So different aspects here that matter. As I said, I'm not going through each of them, but the state, for example, is an important figure to look at. So what kind of role of the state do we see, or do we have at play in different ideas of the Energiewende? Is it defined as an actor that provides a guiding regulatory framework that cares for the people, or is it more like an opponent to more radical Energiewende imaginaries that protect the status quo, prevent societal change? And so on. The market is another interesting aspect. So do we have confidence in the market forces, open competition to achieve an Energiewende, or do we also see it as a problem, and opposition to the market is important as it is a threat to public interest? So you see, when you compare what kind of dominant understanding of the Energiewende there is, you can juxtapose it with kind of critical discontents. It doesn't mean that this is clear cut, and these categories are they are not clear cut, and there are a lot of blurry grayish areas in between, but just to give some ideal type ideas of this differentiation. So final slide, conclusions, which are, as I said, not really conclusions, more preliminary thoughts. That, as I said, that the term Energiewende absorbs fundamentally different visions of the future through various modes of simplification, marginalization, colonization, and is therefore very essentially contested concept, and that socio-technical imaginaries help us or enable us to do, well, at least three things. The first one is to draw the lines between different visions of the future and their broader implications for social order, power relations, science, and technology. So it opens the way, or opens up the room of inquiry when we talk about the energy transition. It helps us to systematically engage with the co-production of social order, so what is, and competing visions of the futures, what are, attached to technology-related projects. So it helps us to link the often implicit ideas of future society or future societal projects to technological developments. And finally, and with this I come to the end, it helps us to problematize the path-dependent historical accounts of the Energiewende. So it's not a gradual process, but rather a societal struggle. I think that is very important to understand the Energiewende not as a kind of naturally technology-driven endeavor, but where there's a societal struggle where some lose and others win by expanding. So it expands the level of inquiry to broader questions of social order and politics and power. And with that, I'm thanking you, and hope I was okay with time. Hello.
Back from the internet. And yes,
Okay.
very much for the presentations. There's probably great applause in the audience, which is unfortunately you're not able to hear. But we already have some first questions for you. And the first one is by Timothy Moss. Well, there was also one person before that, Karina Liersch, who asked you to get in contact with her, just that you don't oversee that. Maybe check in the chat later. And then there was one question or two questions by Timothy Moss. He asked, do you see the contestation around the Energiewende as a problem or a source of diverse application imaginaries? And second, he asked, how helpful is it to set up competing imaginaries as a binary choice? Does that not miss hybridization, fluidity, etc.? Yeah, those two questions are the first one. You are muted.
Now there's a green light. Okay. Thanks a lot. Is there any chance to somehow copy the chat or save the chat? I think it isn't, right? Okay. Yeah, thanks, Timothy. Very good questions, and I start with the final one. If it's useful, now I would actually say no, it's not useful, as I just did it. So I give these ideal type categories, but it helps at least me as a researcher to categorize and to juxtapose what I see as kind of the dominant or mainstream idea of the Energiewende with some, well, I would say the kind of most radical or most alternative ideas to that dominant imaginary. So as I said, there's very much grayish area in between, and it's also would say it's kind of misleading to give these, okay, this is the coherent dominant imaginary versus these alternative visions or alternative imaginaries of the Energiewende. But personally, it helps as a starting point to flesh out where differences are, where different alternatives exist towards the dominant imaginary. So it's I totally agree that well, it was a question, but if you would say give this argument, I would agree to say that this binary choice formulation doesn't help to eliminate or is problematic in terms of raising out what is in between. And then the second one, I would rather perceive it as a source of the, well, rather as a source than a problem to elaborate on this ways of differently formulated. So the Energiewende and the various processes that are behind who is kind of in charge or frames the discourse of what the Energiewende is, and looking into modes of contestation that either succeeded or failed. I see this as highly helpful, and as I said, it's like a source of these applications of socio-technical imaginaries, because it could also help us or inform us about what kind of emerging imaginaries are out there, but are not yet imaginaries. I mean, socio-technical imaginaries is more, in this classical idea, is to have institutionalized and very much state-driven visions of the future, which many of the alternatives have never been and are not. So I think it maybe helps us also to critically reflect about socio-technical imaginaries as a concept, how to incorporate marginalized imaginaries or emerging imaginaries or whatever you want to call it. I think now you are muted, Julia.
Yeah, I love this. It's the sentence of the year. You are muted. Because of time restrictions, I would say we have two more questions and then we move on to next presenters. There are more in the chat. So maybe, even though I'm pretty sure you can do multitasking while you're listening to the other presentations, you might be able to answer the rest of your questions in the chat. That would be really nice. So we have one question by Karen Herbstritt, who ask, have you thought about the imaginaries as exemplified by the example of the Greens in terms of scale and space of the transition?
I have a little bit of a problem to understand this. Can Karen briefly explain what you mean with that?
Okay, so Karen briefly explains what she means with that, and then we move on to the last question that we will answer in the session before we move on to the next presentation. Alexander said it was a great presentation, and he was wondering how you account for representing the diversity within the dominant imaginary and within the field of contestation. How can we avoid producing a binary distinct between the two?
Right. I mean, that goes very much into the direction of Timothy Moss' questions. And I think, yeah, very good question. I think what this concept helps us to do is to look into a certain actor, for example. So if we look into the state and the federal government, and this is a very, very kind of simple idea of socio-technical imaginary. So how does the federal government tries to and does frame the Energiewende, and what is it not? What is left out? And so we concentrate on one actor or actor group, helps us to focus and to narrow down what we actually mean with dominant imaginary. And then from there on to see what kind of forms of contestation come from different actors. That does not necessarily need to be the same ideas of, for example, of the role of the market. So there could be more pushes towards more market-friendly energy transition, or more skeptical and more radical ideas on the other side. So I think that is something also I'm struggling with, in a way to apply it in a way that it's not too superficial and too narrow and leaves out too many aspects. But on the other hand, it helps us actually to focus on, as I said, if we take the state as the actor that defines this dominant imaginary of the Energiewende, which might be contested, to then look at other actors, other players, to see what in these different categories, if we see some disruption or not. So again, it's not either dominant or alternative. There is a lot of also a lot going on in between.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for all of your answers and perspective. I would say we leave it to it, and if possible, could you answer the rest of the questions via chat? You can also book via this great online platform discussions or meetings with researchers. So all of you are also invited to book a meeting with Jens to discuss your questions. And I think I have Silvio now introducing Stefan and me.
Yeah, right. And that is the second presentation of our today's session, which will be held by Julia Epp and Stefan Bohn. Julia Epp is currently a PhD researcher at the Digital Mobilization Group at the Berlin Social Science Center. And Stefan Bohn is currently a postdoc at the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, if I'm rightly informed. And their presentation is about imaginaries, what a surprise, and it is entitled Imaginaries Between Pessimism and the Future, a topic modeling study about the hydrogen and fuel cell debate in Germany. Stage is yours. And as always, you can just post your questions in the chat.
Yes, it would be nice, Jens, if you mute yourself. I think you are still unmuted. Not unmuted. And Stefan Bohn is somewhere here as well in the session. I hope he is ready to answer your questions as well. He was a little bit busy this week. So I will present and we will both together answer all of your questions. Still waiting for the screen share to kick in. Kicked out. Unfortunately, I'm having technical difficulties. I don't know if anyone can still hear me.
We can see you, but we cannot see the screen sharing. Maybe if you... Oh. Now I can't see you, Julia. Seems to be an issue. Maybe as a remark, when the time of the presentation reaches the end, I will suggest that Julia and me just turn on our cameras, so the presenters should see us and know, okay, this is the last 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up the presentation. And I hope Julia will be back in a minute. Otherwise, maybe if there are still problems with Julia and Stefan.
I'm back. Sorry, I was
Okay.
kicked out of the conference, but now I am back. Sorry for the little technical difficulties. We all love the digital life. Okay, so we now come to our input on hydrogen, or the discourse on hydrogen and fuel cell technology. Stefan Bohn and I, we have developed these ideas 2 years ago, where we have always discussed how crazy this discourse is on hydrogen, how huge the hype has developed, or how the hype has developed in general. And so we came up with a new research question or a research idea.
Julia,
Yes?
we only hear you. I think your camera is not on, and we don't see your slides. There you are. So we see you, but we don't see your slides. Maybe you can try again. And if it doesn't work, we can maybe switch around and have Alex first. So you can try again. Oh, now it's working. Okay.
Okay. It's weird that the people who are organizing it having the most difficulties. Okay, I hope now it works. Yes. So this is still a work in project process research idea. So we were wondering which expectations on hydrogen and fuel cell technology can be identified in the public discourse in the last 2 decades in Germany. So as I said, we have seen a huge gain in prominence of hydrogen and fuel cell technology in the last couple of years. And also it's more and more framed as an important element of the energy transition, also to decarbonize certain sectors as the transport sector, synthetic fuels, but also the industry, steel and chemical industry. And however, this discourse has developed in the last couple of years, more dynamic, and we wanted to look which expectations or imaginaries play a role in this hype about hydrogen. And we focused in Germany because we have seen a lot of large commitments by companies and politicians or policies to establish a hydrogen economy, but we are aiming to do a comparison to the US, since there's also a big boost in hydrogen by several companies and states like California, and also by Japan, who is also a big supporter of the hydrogen economy. And to better understand which expectations are linked to the hydrogen economy, we decided to do a longitudinal research and see how they have developed over time. For now in Germany, we still have to get the data for the US and Japan. Yes, from the theoretical framework that we are using or that we are discussing, we were for a long time looking at how we can use imaginaries as a concept to explain which how this discourse has developed, and if imaginaries, and we're also referring to Jasanoff and Kim, are a suitable theoretical approach. And most of you know their definition, that it refers to a cultural research that enables new forms of life by providing positive goals and seeking them to attain them. But we also have looked into other research by SCS, for example, the concept of expectations, which has been used in a multi-level perspective by Gales, or it was presented by Gales, and also in other innovation research, transition research, and in sociology. Expectations have often played a huge role. One of the reasons we started, or we wanted to do this session today, that Silvio and I planned, was that we always wonder how imaginaries work together with media and data that we gain from media, because media is often very well researched by frames and communication research, and we often find it difficult to link those two, because it always depends, imaginaries depend on a certain data or a certain research focus that you set, but we are often not so sure if media and imaginaries actually work that well together. So right now we focus a lot on the concept of expectations, and we used Jens Becker's idea. He redeveloped, or he looked at Anderson's concept of imaginaries, and he applied it to the dynamics of the capitalist economy to see how imaginaries stir decisions on future innovations and investments. So that was something that we are very much interested in. Why are people interested in hydrogen and fuel cell technology? And there's a lot of money, which is also playing a huge role in this discourse and power. So we wanted to account for that. And Becker's names his imaginaries fictional expectations, which can be described as following: when making decisions, actors associate certain future results with the course of action. They are contemplating, connecting numerous outcomes with different possible decisions. And Becker's fictional expectations, they help actors to stir their actions during uncertainty. They the expectations are supposed to affect outcomes, so they have an active influence on the outcomes. They are a source of innovation, and they shape social and political structure. So that's what we thought was very helpful to analyze the discourse about hydrogen. And the method that we used to explore this discourse is called topic modeling. Stefan Bohn is here, our expert, and can answer more questions about it. It's a relatively new method in social science, and it's used for mapping and analyzing frames. For example, if you have a certain text or a document, it's an algorithm that can build frames out of your document, and gives you an idea how which words are often used, and how they are communicated in this document. And we have already drawn data from most of the German newspapers. We used a public database, Nexus and Viso, and we looked at newspaper articles from 1994 to 2019. Last year we didn't have time to work on this project, so we still have to add the data from 2020. And altogether we had 18,000 paragraphs. So the topic modeling works with paragraphs. That's why we have to divide the articles sometimes. And then the topic modeling is the algorithm that looks at what frames and which word clouds can be generated from this data. And to give you maybe some idea of our first results, we have looked at, or here you can see the development of press articles on hydrogen in Germany from 1994 until 2019. And you already see at the end of 2018 that there's a huge peak. And we think because of the German National Hydrogen Strategy and of the European Hydrogen Strategy, this peak must have been 2020 even continued to an even steeper level. We made out some bigger events, which can also be seen in the newspaper, like in the development of the news articles or in the development of publishing about hydrogen. So, for example, in 2000, BMW introduced their first 15 fuel cell cars. There we had a peak, and in 2011, Daimler announced its hydrogen offensive at IAA. Right now, we're trying to figure out which different phases can be seen in this in the public discourse. Because right now we have a huge hype, but it's not the first hype about hydrogen. There had been hypes before, and we tried to find key events and then also reasons why there had been no breakthrough by the hydrogen technology. So, for example, in the 2000 years or in the first hype hydrogen, you can see that most articles also deal with huge costs, no infrastructure, and that those had been reasons why this hype wasn't, let's say, implemented in real technology progress. So we also said before that we are interested in the investments in hydrogen technology. We looked at the German National Investment Program in hydrogen fuel cell technology and also at general hydrogen investments. And you can see that a lot of companies are making huge progress on their shares on the market. And also that the investment programs by the German national program have steeply increased as well. Now yearly since 2018, there are 80 million available just by the Ministry of Transport for hydrogen fuel cell technology research. But by now also other research programs have been initiated, which offer a lot of money to implement hydrogen and research technology. And we now want to look what has changed and why are people so much more interested in funding this. From our data that we extracted from the articles, we also set or looked at some first tendencies, and we can see that you can pretty much divide the articles into possible applications. So what is hydrogen used for, and different frames, how hydrogen is communicated with. On the left-hand side, you can see different applications that are often can be found in the articles. So most of the time when there is an article in Germany about hydrogen technology, it's about the fuel cell car. But you can see that there's the diversity, and the diversity in the last, since 2018, has increased, where there's also more talk about synthetic fuels, more about projects, more about different hydrogen carriers or projects in the transport sector, like fuel cell trains or fuel cell trucks. And when you look at frames, how hydrogen is communicated in those articles, you can also see that it has always been something that has been framed as a future technology. So the yellow line, future, has always been very prominent. And also the challenge frame has always been very prominent, so that people always said, okay, we want fuel cell cars, but there's no infrastructure, it's very expensive. But the challenge frame is now declining. And since a couple of years, the sustainability frame is highly increasing. So we can see that now that hydrogen is more and more finding its role in the energy mobility transition as energy storage, as synthetic fuel for ships and planes where there's not so much room for electric mobility, that the sustainability frame is gaining more and more importance. So yes, my final remarks are that we are, as I said, using the approach by Becker to understand how hydrogen is communicated, but we are still looking to discuss how we can link imaginaries, expectations, media frames all together, because there are a lot of possibilities how to approach this research coming. And as I also said, we'll add more data, or we'll add data from 2020, and probably expect even greater shifts towards sustainability and more applications, and even a higher amount of articles which had been published. And we, in the next step, want to review the data, because we have so much data. We now need to better understand how it developed over time, the frames, and analyze the data for also the challenges which are communicated in the articles, and also maybe to better understand the expectations. We want to take a bigger look at what we can get out of the data. As I said, we decided to do it over the last couple of years, and then we also want to understand how the frames have changed. Future always seemed to be very important, but sustainability seems to have given hydrogen a great boost. And for us, this comparison to the discourse in Japan and US would help to understand which other expectations are linked to hydrogen in different countries. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm interested in your feedback.
Thank you very much, Julia. The first question from Alexander. As you said, hydrogen has always been the technology that is only 10 years away from market diffusion. Why do you think this has become such a great hype again at this specific moment, given the previous disappointments? Sustainability has been a powerful rhetoric in previous episodes as well.
Yes, I would like to invite also Stefan to join if he's still here and answer questions. And it's a good question. From the data, we don't know yet. I put in 2018, a couple of things happened in Germany, at least. Copernicus project started to be Reallabore project started. We have the first fuel cell train, which started operating in 2018, and we had, for example, Clever Shuttle using fuel cell cars. So we have a higher visibility for fuel cell applications. But the hydrogen strategy and the European hydrogen strategy, they only followed last year. So it's difficult. We have to check in the data what else happened that catalyzed hydrogen in the late years of 2080s. But those were the events that we know about. And we think that maybe wind power also has something to do with it, that we are phasing out wind power in Germany, and a lot of people are interested if it's possible to produce hydrogen with phased out wind power plants, which are not longer in a feed-in tariff. So there are many motives which would explain it, but that would be also one of our next steps to understand that better.
Next question is from Abdullah Fahimi. Interesting presentation. Can you explain the graph in your theory slide? And the second question is concerned with the methodology. It's maybe a question Stefan can answer in the chat, I guess. It's about looking for word frequency. If the methodology of topic modeling is about looking for word frequencies and keywords. So maybe the first to the theory question.
I looked at different concepts on expectations, which are used in STS in transition management. And this is one that's used in the multi-level perspective by Gears, and it says that there's an interaction between expectations, strategies, and activities. So, for example, if fuel cell technology still is in a niche technology, but actors expect it to develop in a certain way, they change their strategies and adjust how they act. For example, they will influence regulations and also influence the landscape to manage their expectations on a niche technology, and this leads to different activities by the actors. I think it's also a very interesting approach to explain how expectations and niche technology work together. For me, it's a little bit neglected to why those expectations exist in general. So I would also want to know how those expectations come to play. Are they power driven? Are they idealistic? Is there also an external reason why external pressure, why this niche is no longer a niche?
Yeah, maybe.
Is he here?
Yeah, he will answer in the chat. The second question. Maybe we can come back to a comment of Alexander, but I think it is a question as well, and it is concerned with the if the imaginary concept adds value to your methodology and to your approach, and if not, something like hype cycle analysis would work better for your material.
We had this discussion a lot, you and I, and also with other people from our research group, if the imaginary concept here is a good concept to help us. I think when you work with media, it's a little bit difficult because media is always framed somewhere, and frames and imaginaries are not the same concept, and they have different advantages and disadvantages. So if you want to look at imaginaries in the hydrogen sector, it might be more interesting to deal with the actors who are driving those expectations. But when we work with media, it's a little bit, for me, easier to see how it's framed and how it has developed. But maybe in the next step, we can see how imaginaries play into it.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do, or maybe to deepen the Beckert choice, just as someone who has talked with Julia about the paper. It's a lot about these communications and expectations framing via media. And then I think these stock markets make sense as an extra data to show how expectations have real influences in investment decisions. So I think Beckert is a lot about economic sociology. So there are investment decisions because of expectations, and if you can show that with your data, then maybe Beckert is a good source.
Yeah, I think I really like Beckert. And we could also, of course, we could also connect these topics and all these frames and these positive and negative evaluations of fuel cells. We could also connect it to the actors, because these topics that we found in the data, that topics about frames, but also about actors, and so we connect both kind of topics. But it's also maybe a later stage, and at the end we have to decide which way is the best for us and which is the most promising or most interesting. So we'll see. So thanks for the comments.
Yeah, time-wise, we also probably should move on.
Yeah, thank you very much, you two. And then I give back to Julia in her old and new role as a moderator.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We are happy to get feedback to our idea, and we will have our next presentation or input by Alexander Wendland, who's a postdoc at Technical University Munich and works on innovation research. And yeah, he is very much interested in science, society and public policy, research and sustainability transitions, and regional diversity and innovation governance, and will now present his research.
Thank you very much, Julia. Can you all see my slides and hear me? Yes, I take it as a yes.
Yes.
Splendid. Well, since the rest of my presentation will be, well, let's say a bit sobering, I would like to share some good news first. The work I'm going to present comes out of ongoing research at TU Munich. And just this month, my colleagues and I have won the funding to build an interdisciplinary society-centered regional cluster for urban mobility. It is a great opportunity for research, but also putting ideas into practice. We are obviously very excited about this. Feel free to get in touch with us during the cyber coffee break. Well, now on to the more sobering part. A decade ago, the German government declared that electric vehicles will transform our daily mobility practices, urban space, and the national economy. Many experts agreed and engaged in more or less radical speculation, including a lot of critical social scientists. Yet proponents and critics alike feel disillusioned. Why has e-mobility not delivered the radical technological future that many had hoped for? I'm building on the imaginarist perspective and will empirically consider how e-mobility, propagated in Germany since 2009, does not challenge the automotive society, but renews its central promises. And you need to bear with me now, since our images of the new are always co-produced with the foundations of the existing, and the old must be continually reinvented. Many supposedly disruptive technological futures often serve, in the end, to renew the existing. Okay. Even contested structures like the system of automobility persist not in spite of, but because of ubiquitous high-tech utopias that seem to challenge them. This is basically my main argument in a nutshell. Talking about the topic of this session, socio-technical imaginaries. This approach allows us to make arguments like the one I just made to analyze change and persistence as two sides of the same coin. In this paper, I use the approach as theorized by STS scholar Sheila Jasanoff. She proposes imaginaries as a conceptual lens that allows us to better explain and understand the process by which actors collectively assemble, reproduce, and renegotiate materiality, meaning, and morality. The imaginaries framework builds on the idea that technology and social order are co-produced. In other words, the way we experience the world and shape it through our action is inextricably linked to the way we imagine our existence in this world, and vice versa. Understood this way, the imaginary's perspective not only aims to determine the influence of new technologies, it explains the remarkable continuity of existing arrangements. Unlike fictions, hypes, or ideas of individual visionaries, I'm thinking of Elon Musk and other people here, imaginaries are collective, enduring, and must be enacted in social practice. So sometimes the idea of a fictional or emerging technology is referred to as an imaginary as well. However, and I've put this quote on the slide, I would argue with Sheila Jasanoff here, and she understands imaginaries as a, quote, continually re-articulated awareness of order in social life and a resulting commitment to that order's coherence and continuity. So, bottom line, imaginaries have to be collectively anchored, institutionally stabilized, and enacted, which makes, especially nation-state politics, the privileged starting point of consideration, also my starting point. In the next couple of minutes, I consider the recent ongoing episode of e-mobility in Germany. Well, since there's an entire parallel session on transportation going on at this very moment, I will mostly highlight a couple of aspects here. I think that basically illustrate the types of questions and themes the imaginary's perspective lends itself to. So feel free to ask me more deep empirical details in the Q&A. So despite its controversies, e-mobility remains associated with great promise. This is most evident in the early stages, but still now in many ways. The early stages was basically the rediscovery of the topic in German innovation policy in the late 2000s. And in the National Development Plan for electric mobility, the government predicted nothing less than a paradigm shift. There's a great number of very emphatic statements in these government reports and announcements. So you see one image of one of these reports right here, but there are many. I looked with my colleagues into hundreds of these documents and also conducted more than 50 expert interviews. But just to give you a couple of examples, electric mobility will supposedly bring opportunities for new vehicle categories and modern transport concepts. It can be a building block for intelligent and multimodal mobility concepts of the future. So on this path, the world would indeed look increasingly post-automobile. Okay, why then does what we observe today look like an updated version of the conventional car society? I want to highlight three main insights here. And again, apologies if it's a little bit superficial, but I have to keep time in mind. As one of its first measures in 2009, the German government founded the National Platform for E-Mobility. The NPE was a planning and steering body that included stakeholders from politics, business, science, and civil society. Through this institutional move, the German government neutralized potentially conflicting interests early on. The NPE stabilized and depoliticized the so-called Verkehrswende as a technocratically organized and state-cushioned transition, seemingly without winners and losers. Before e-mobility could become a reality, relevant technologies first had to be made ready for the market, particularly battery technology. Kind of sounds familiar also with the hydrogen hypes at previous times. In the subsequent expert discourse, the future of mobility became primarily about technical innovation, feasibility, and efficiency. Actual changes in the mobility system would have to wait until technology had solved the supposed problem of range. Secondly, the enactment of mobility, e-mobility, to date aligns with previously established ideals of social life. Notion of the nuclear family with a private home and a private vehicle. Even if this imaginary has never coincided with the reality of life for a majority of people, it remains strongly associated with middle-class ideas and prosperity. In short, the good life. More radical changes in mobility patterns so far have been limited to a group of mostly urban, young, educated, text-heavy users. This association made it easier for the imaginary of automobility to prevail outside of these milieus, arguably. Lastly, the enactment of e-mobility to date resonates with Germany's imaginary as an automotive nation, as well as that of an ecological pioneer. Interesting kind of contradiction here, apparently. But e-mobility is seen as a necessity to defend and expand Germany's industrial and technological position in the world. In hardly any other country is the project of a liberal democracy historically so closely linked to car manufacturing. In times of Dieselgate and climate catastrophe, e-mobility promises to straighten out the tarnished image of the car and Germany as one of the largest car nations. Through ambitious targets in emission reduction and massive investments in sustainable technology, Germany would once again be considered a vindicated pioneer, this time in a green global capitalism. All right. To wrap things up, as we approach the end of the time, conceptually and empirically, this paper shows how political collectives make sense of their past, present, and future. Considering the regular questioning of the automotive society, its stability seems remarkable, but can be explained with the imaginary's perspective. The depoliticization of the future, the stabilization of imagined ways of life, and the perpetuation of national self-images reveal the mutual co-production of a potentially open mobility future with the deadlocked automotive present. So both are interlinked and closely connected, not the opposite of each other. In other words, e-mobility is the urgently needed high-tech utopia that can be used to unfold and stabilize the existing well-rehearsed structure in a modified version. Since e-mobility promises a less painful ecological turnaround and technical solutions to social problems, more radical visions remain largely marginal. In this sense, the future of mobility is today, as it was yesterday, automobile. Thank you very much. And well, since time has passed since I applied for this conference, the paper for this, at least in German, is already out. So thank you again. If you like, you can have a look. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And we are looking forward to your questions. We already have one in the chat by Stefan, which I cannot read it. It's already gone.
Stefan, thanks, Alex. Great presentation. Okay, it's about the fossil lock-in or automobile path dependency. But what's the way out of this in terms of sustainable transition? Well, if I knew the answer, I guess I would still be here. But I guess I would be much more optimistic and hopeful. Well, I guess the way out of this lock-in is something that has fascinated and puzzled many people, also in the parallel session right now, and also my colleagues at the Digital Mobility Research Group at WZB. Maybe they even have a better answer than I am. I tend to be slightly more pessimistic than some of my friends there, because as I try to argue, in a way, see that for a kind of radical departure, innovation and technology might not necessarily be the best, or perhaps not even one really suitable way, but in fact could be something that rather stabilize or reinvigorate something we would want to get rid of or radically reform. So I would definitely say that in other analyses I did of the discourse field, the contestations going more into a degrowth or post-growth kind of framing and proposed lifestyle and transition, those things seem to kind of like bypass these pitfalls I've just outlined here. Yeah, we can talk about this more in the chat if you like. I don't have the solution, unfortunately.
Yeah, that would also mean you would have achieved something that no one else has achieved. But unfortunately, Andreas Knie didn't give his keynote speech because he was sick, but that would have been probably answered some of those aspects. And as you said, in our research group, the topic is very prominent, and I think he would answer that experiments help to show people it's not that difficult to live without a car, especially in cities. You have to have different policies concerning city and rural areas, different concepts, and he also often says that well, we don't want to get rid of the car itself, and also the city we want to change property, so the car is no longer an individual possession, but it's shared by everybody, and that would reduce cars a lot on the streets.
Right. And to add to this real quick, I mean, the kind of cluster for the metropolitan region of Munich that we have proposed tries to do that to a large extent. And also in terms of processes, bring together research, companies, especially startups, the city of Munich and civil society actors. So in a way, like tailor solutions really to these specific places, cities or rural areas, and try to like find out what kinds of things you can actually achieve with what kinds of resistances and what you actually have. And then, as you said, I mean, Julia, you already mentioned a few important aspects like living labs and co-creative approaches to these kinds of things. So basically work from societal needs and also like a positive image for the people who are actually affected by these things. Like when you rearrange the urban space as such, I think that is very powerful.
Yeah, Rainer Kutzo, he commented that it appears that the German automotive industry is not as progressive. It's a similar comment as said before, but they are still in love with the fossil combustion engine or now with e-fuels. I don't know if you want to react to this comment, but it's something that we can actually probably agree on that is partly true.
Yeah, I mean, in this sense, it's interesting that the default is always, or tends to be, especially from the incumbent industry, to basically switch the engine or the fuel or the energy source. But the rest of what actually matters to people, how we want to live in our cities, how we want to arrange our life, affordability, accessibility of these kinds of things, is usually not addressed by these visions, obviously, including autonomous driving, which I guess many are in this room also slightly skeptical about, might not solve the problem if the problem for you is the car basically clogging up all of our cities, and you want a city that doesn't really have cars in it. Then obviously making the car more efficient or changing the energy source won't really address those concerns.
Yeah, he further he added another question, like what do you make of car makers' experiments with car sharing? So I think this is also towards the discussion we just had, and that those experiments help. Well, there's a famous case in Charlottenburg, and I don't know if Munich has similar experiments where car owners have to park their cars in faraway parking lots and cannot use it for a month, but are allowed to use different modes of traffic, car sharing. They get free coupons to understand that if they share their cars, or if they don't own a private cars, it would reduce cars drastically in cities. And as most of you know, cars, an average car stands around 23 hours a day in a city. So it's not an efficient use. And if you would have an efficient use, you would have less cars in the city. That's my answer to that question. I don't know if you want to add.
That's a great point, Julia. Maybe from the socio-technical imaginary's perspective, I mean, Andreas Knie used to say, like, it's about the car in our head, right? Not necessarily just the car on the street. And this, I think, is very much like what the concept has in, no pun intended, in mind. So this intricate connection between how we perceive our everyday life, what our values are, what we think is a legitimate and just social order, how things ought to be, and how then on larger scale states or nations reflect these kinds of values, what kinds of policies come out of that. And if I look at the kind of response of individuals, but also the state to the COVID pandemic and what this tells us about mobility and transportation, that does not necessarily give me that much hope in terms of getting rid of the car anytime soon.
Yes. At the same time, it does reduce our transport need.
It's true. But I'm here still in Munich. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. There's some more questions that are popping up in the chat for you. One by Silvio, one by Klaus Seibt. I will leave you to it in the chat, and yeah, I think Silvio's turn.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, to have a sharp time management, we will come now to our fourth presentation of today's session, and it will be held by Joni Karalainen. Joni Karalainen is a doctoral student at the Finland Futures Research Finland Futures Research Center, and his presentation is entitled Images of the Future in Pioneering Niches, Off-Grid Solar Entrepreneurship in Kenya and Tanzania. And without further ado, the stage is yours.
Thanks. Great. Can you see my slides? Yep. Okay. Thanks a lot. It's been really interesting to listen to the conversation so far. I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Joni Karalainen. I'm a project researcher and a doctoral student in future studies in the University of Turku in Finland. And certainly listening to the discussions on imaginaries is quite interesting from the perspective of the topic of our session today, namely the implications of different imaginary concepts for energy futures, interdisciplinary gains or quarrels. And I suppose what I'll try and focus on in my short presentation is to think a little bit about the conceptual and methodological implications of the concepts that we use, and specifically introduce the concepts of the image of the future. And perhaps it will also lead us to thinking some of the similarities or differences with the concept of imaginaries used by Jasanoff and Kim. But let me go to the actual empirical part of my research. So the research that I'm focusing on as one part of my doctoral work looks at the pioneering markets with off-grid solar photovoltaic products and services in East African countries, and specifically drawing on experiences in Kenya and Tanzania. Some of the recent developments, if we just look at the what we first mean by the markets themselves, consisting of the off-grid markets are the solar lanterns, solar home systems, mini-grid developments, and other segments such as productive uses of energy. And the specific focus and interest in my work is in these market-oriented developments, which in some ways makes entrepreneurs and firms the key actors of understanding and studying these developments that are happening. Of course, this doesn't exclude the many intermediaries and other ecosystemic actors that are related to some of these entrepreneurial journeys. But in terms of understanding what the future might look like, and especially from the market dynamics perspective, the focus is on these particular actors. And why this might potentially be an interesting case study onto which apply the concepts of images of the future is the fact that the off-grid PV sector is globally a relatively new market, which nonetheless has grown quite a bit over the past 10 years. So we might argue that this is a rapidly emerging and evolving phenomenon that might have future implications to begin with. And therefore, it might be interesting and useful to look at some of these pioneering dynamics and some of the pioneering markets more closely. And in some ways, what has enabled these developments to take place. And as a kind of a hypothesis that underpins this thinking is that if we look at some of the pioneering or leading developments, perhaps we might also gain some sort of knowledge about futures, different types of possible futures, and the implications that some of these developments might carry. This would not mean that learning from such developments would be prescriptive, but rather provide evidence of some of the potential dynamics that might take place. But as the conversation really today focuses on the images of the future, I'm more interested in discussing the kinds of futures that some of these pioneering journeys are in some ways symbolizing more broadly. So focusing on off-grid entrepreneurship, these are the types of pioneering actors that are pursuing certain types of objectives and potentially in them. And through understanding them, we might also understand something about the futures that they see possible. The broader methodological basis for this research draws on looking at the developments in the sector as a whole. There's quite ample literature on some of these developments by other scholars, which give a fairly good understanding of the past and present conditions. But there's perhaps less work around the future conditions and future uncertainties and future implications. Not to speak of the kind of multiple types of futures that we might have to think of when we try and understand the developments forward. So from this, building a database from the different companies that operate in this sector, and also after speaking to some of these firms and other actors in the ecosystem, the aim has really been to map and understand the system dynamics, and from these dynamics to begin to think some of the uncertainties and contestations for the future. And I will now get, for the latter part of my presentation, go to the concepts of images of the future and to kind of explain how I interpret them and see their relevance for my study. So the idea with images of the future is, the term originally comes from two founders in the field of future studies, which is an academic niche, not really widely spread, but still practiced in a number of universities around the world. Wendell Bell and specifically Fred Pollack paid attention to images of the future and the sort of pull that on the images that we hold, they might have implications also on the pursuit and the collective thinking, how we see the future. And why to pay attention to the plurality was a reason to move away from a single normative future that we might wish to pursue and try and identify different types of images that can be simultaneously held. And potentially by identifying multiple images would also create a more pluralistic understanding of the different types of futures that can even coexist and be collectively held by numbers of groups. And there are different ways to approach it. Some scholars have identified different types of archetypes concerning the future, such as growth, collapse, transformation, and so on. And there are also different empirical ways and methodological ways to actually aim to identify these types of images. So in terms of more contemporary studies on how these types of images of the future, they've been identified from drawing on kind of a compilation of studies combined with barometer national kind of comparative studies, and combining methodological combinations of literature reviews, futures workshops, in-depth interviews and thematic analysis and so forth. So a range of qualitative methods primarily, at least in these studies. There might be more. But one interesting point that comes out that in one of the studies is that extracting these images of the future may demand a subtle combination of methods to understand the complex late modernity environment in which we presently live in. So I think it's interesting and also important for a researcher who uses the concept of, in this case, images of the future, but potentially imaginaries as well, to try and think of the complexities of the the changing society we live in, and also the different types of futures that we might experience in the future. I think that this actually came quite well in the previous presentation, and I think those were really interesting points made by Alexander. So from this, I'll just try and raise a couple of practical ways through which I'm trying to identify images of the future in my work, and then raise a couple of questions with which I will conclude. The images of the future are, in some ways, they have some similar elements to scenarios, but in contrast to scenarios, images of the future are more like glimpses or some sort of representations of the future. And they don't contain narratives or pathways that will lead into these futures. So I suppose in some ways they're a more narrow concept than operating with scenarios. And I would also argue that they are potentially a more narrow concept than imaginaries, in the way that they present more kind of collective and wider societally held visions. I'm not entirely sure about this argument, but this is something that maybe I'll leave to discussion. The way I'm trying to identify images of the future in my work is to look at the range of data I've collected, use different qualitative analytic methods from content analysis and so forth, identify key uncertainties, and from there to test and validate the draft images of the future with certain experts. And you can see on the right-hand side just these 4 sort of sketches of the images of the future that I currently hold for the off-grid solar PV developments. And from the namings and from the initial thinking, they raise different kinds of aspects on ongoing developments and potentially their implications for the future. One of them emphasizing social entrepreneurship, the other one more present dynamics with the uncertainties brought by the COVID-19 crisis, the sort of long-term dynamics and potentially aspirational objectives, and finally the sort of more political or institutional configurations that also are represented in the way and the interplay of these actors in these markets manifests. So the idea is to develop these sketches forward, make a systematic way of identifying some of the key uncertainties, and then also to organize and open up what these images mean in a nutshell, rather not making them into scenarios, but rather just to keep them concise and open and easily understandable. So I'll just conclude here with some questions that also have to do with the imaginaries. So I think, generally speaking, I think it's important to understand the level, the scope, and the representativeness of the images. Think about the different time scales, and finally also the uncertainties that are related to when using and operating such images. So I'll just conclude my thinking here and perhaps open up the space for discussion to discuss this forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very insightful, and I'm happy to have some data from outside the European or Western bubble, and to also have some insight from future studies with a different imaginary concept or imagined future concept. But I think there are a lot of points that are also that we have also seen in the previous presentations. I'm not seeing questions yet, so maybe I will just start with one. In your methodology, you talked about naming the images, like when you had this process of data, and the last one was naming the images. Is it like you are looking into interview data and you get the naming or the framing of images from CEOs, from persons from the media and so on, or are you looking for names that more or less gather the different image or similar images of people you have interviewed?
I guess I was referring to the fact that typically in scenario work, the idea is to open up different types of futures, and by identifying from the data, from the different types of data, so this includes both primary data with the interviews and secondary data from the reports. My idea is to identify some of the key uncertainties that open up these different types of images. And then once kind of finding the key logic of each image, it's usually a good idea to try and name them in a way that is understandable and potentially even provocative for the reader or for the user, in the way that it would kind of represent the kind of one possible future that might result as an outcome of these developments. So that, I would say, is generally my interpretation of the potential usefulness of naming. Rather than remaining at a very conceptual level, I believe it can be possible to have the conceptual and theoretical underpinnings and then summarize them in a more succinct form.
Okay, then we have two questions from Abdullah Fahimi. The first one is, in what ways is this concept different from imaginaries? And the second one is looking at uncertainties in the society key to understanding futures.
Great, yeah, great questions. I'll start with the first one. I think the history of these two concepts is different. The concept of imaginaries comes from the field of STS studies, and the image of the future comes from the field of future studies. And this might also explain how these two interrelated concepts are interpreted and how they have been used. Initially, image of the future, to Pollack, the way he classically defined it, had more to do with technological progress and kind of cultural change and the dynamics between them. But in the present use, the way I've seen it being used, I think we can also think in much more practical terms. For instance, the types of images of the future that the youth, for instance, might have. The idea is what they have when they grow up, let's say. And I think if it's interpreted this way, it sounds to me like it's more narrow than an imaginary. That sounds like a concept that describes the evolution of entire societies and socio-technical imaginaries in particular. It is a bit of a conceptual model, but I think it's possible to look at the different definitions and advance from there. Then there was a second question.
Yeah, the second question is looking at uncertainties in society key to understanding futures.
Great question as well. At least one way is to try and identify some of the key uncertainties and complexities to understand what is their potential significance. Often when analyzing futures, we tend to take quite a narrow scope and only specific dimensions. But given that the world is complex and full of uncertainties, then it's possible, for instance, to try and identify some key uncertainties and think about them and their implications. Because especially if you want to understand long-term developments, the range of uncertainty sort of grows with those developments. And that's why understanding them might be useful. Yes.
Okay, and then maybe just a short answer to Alexander Wendland's question. What methodological challenges did you face when looking into the specific regional context?
Thanks. I think that's a great question as well. I I decided to narrow down my work to the phenomenon of startup entrepreneurship as something present and contextual, and obviously there would be much else to write about as well. So one methodological challenge potentially is to just try and understand one concept well enough, which is transboundary and also geographically and spatially, in some ways happening in a particular locations, but then international and global by nature. So that's certainly one. I won't go into other details, but the interdisciplinary aspect of the work is certainly another contestation.
Very good. There's another question. What was that? There's another question in the chat. I would suggest you can answer it in the chat as well, and we'll go over to Julia for our last presentation.
Yes,
sure.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
And, yeah, we'll now get to our last presentation by Dr. Rainer Kurzow, and yes, we are very happy to have him here as well. He is a research group leader of Pathways to Sustainable Energy at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. And his research focuses on sustainable innovation, industrial policy, and governance of the energy transition in Germany and beyond. So now, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And now, let me see, where did it go? Here we go. Okay, so I hope you can see this.
Yes, start the presentation and it will be.
So you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm actually.
You still need to start the full, I don't know.
Okay, so that didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. This is what happened to Jens,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Let me see.
Try it again and then. Ich glaube, man muss Präsentation beginnen oder also Präsentation starten.
Also genau, was ich gemacht habe, ist den ganzen Screen einfach zu teilen und nicht die Application.
Ja, ich gucke mal.
Okay.
Let's try again. So, okay. All right, I'll try that. Okay, now you see probably the wrong window, but now you should see it, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. All right, so thank you very much. I should start by saying that I am really kind of presenting this on behalf of Sonja Tilges, my colleague, who is the main author of this. I am just the contributor of the China part. But Sonja is on parental leave, and so I decided to take it over. And yeah, and it's also still a bit in an exploratory phase, so I'm very much very keen on hearing not only questions maybe, but also some comments and suggestions on how to further develop and maybe, yeah, tighten this up going forward. So I am talking about visions of sustainable energy in the context of a global energy transition, particularly looking at Germany, the US, and China, and how the visions that are present in those countries and projected internationally by those countries are in competition, conflict, and how this, what implications this has for the successful transition to sustainable energy. So the starting point is that there are indeed these different visions, and that there actually, yeah, there is competition and sort of, yeah, contestation between those visions in the international realm. We already wrote a book chapter on this, very more or less descriptive. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. It's in German. And now we're trying to develop something more analytical, more, yeah, based on that more descriptive piece that we already have completed. So the questions are, what are these guiding visions for the future of energy in China, Germany, and the US? How are they projected internationally? And what is the implication from these differing visions? So we set out the idea of a guiding vision as a shared understanding of overarching goals and a setup of future energy systems, which provides a normative guide for action, which provides a framework for energy policy, and also provides structure and incentives or guidance for public and private decisions. So it's a kind of a central organizing element in a policy field. And they can be, obviously, they have a role also internationally. They can sort of be the basis for shared international norms, and they can also be projected internationally via foreign policy activities, via engagement in global governance institutions by, in this case, these three countries, China, Germany, and the US, obviously all central players in the global energy transition. So we looked at these different countries, looking at available documents and just mainly written material that's out there on these things, and we've compared them and contrasted them. So I start with Germany. Guiding vision Germany is obviously the Energiewende, which the aim of the Energiewende is to, or sort of it frames the transition to sustainable energy as a strategy that is creates a secure, reliable, and economically viably, but also environmentally friendly energy system. And it's both, a vision for decarbonization, but also for economic prosperity. It's based very much on renewables, energy efficiency, and it doesn't really give it any explicit role to fossil fuels and nuclear energy. And especially for nuclear energy, explicitly also excludes that. Same for coal. Gas is sort of like more ambiguous. It's quite, it's not really strongly contested, at least domestically. Obviously there was a long history of contestation that brought us to this point, the sort of Röttgen, Fukushima moment, I think that Jens also mentioned. But the implementation of it is contested. So how to implement the Energiewende is contested, but not necessarily so much the vision itself in Germany. And this has given rise to a German soft power strategy to sort of project this vision. It started sort of in the early 2000s very strongly with a focus on renewables. Germany has launched a whole series of energy partnerships that focus on projecting this vision in ways that are compatible with the partners. So this is kind of the German example, and of course, Germany is also famous because it promoted the foundation of IRENA, the Renewable Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy, as another vehicle for promoting this vision. China has a sort of the core of the Chinese energy transition vision is the idea of a low carbon energy revolution, aims to promote modern, clean, low carbon, safe, efficient energy system, and also industrial leadership in emerging industries. So there's some similarities to also the German approach, because it kind of combines this vision of sustainable energy with industrial leadership, economic prosperity. It's also based on renewables and energy efficiency, but also has very much a place, at least currently still, for nuclear power and natural gas. And so natural gas is also seen as sort of a prominent technology, at least in the transition towards a sustainable future. In domestic politics, the vision is, I would say, strategically vague. So there's a lot of statements about this low carbon energy revolution, but it also leaves things open and leaves some ambiguity about what actually clean energy is. And there's obviously a contested role of coal power. So yeah, even though the central government projects this vision and also positions itself vis-a-vis coal to a certain extent, at other levels of government, it's much less, this vision is not necessarily shared. So there's more of a contestation within China, and I think the response to that, to a certain extent, is this strategic vagueness or ambiguity. And so this, I think, leads also to, in the foreign policy arena, in the international arena, to a situation where really what is happening empirically, so the finance which is very substantial from China that goes into the energy sector abroad, for example, it actually is still very much focused on especially coal, as well as hydropower, and to a certain extent nuclear power, and not so much on wind or solar, even though China is obviously a leader in that field. So I think that is partly also related to this concept of non-interference that China uses as a way to sort of, again, allow for this ambiguity in how it then projects or positions itself in the international fora or international sphere in terms of its engagement with foreign countries. It just sort of goes along with what other countries are trying to do and supports that, and oftentimes that leads to investments in coal. So finally, the U.S. is an interesting case because, and maybe I should flip this over and start with the domestic side. But the vision for a sustainable energy in the U.S. is obviously hotly contested, and there's, due to the vacillation from Obama to Trump and now back to Biden, there's also been a vacillation in the vision for sustainable energy, for an energy transition. Trump formulated the idea of energy dominance. Obama and now Biden, they have more of a clean energy vision. And some of these elements are quite in contradiction with each other, but they also share some commonalities. So I mean, I think the role of gas has played a role also under Obama as a clean energy source. There was a lot of promotion of gas abroad as well as domestically, as a kind of source of reinvigorating the U.S. as an energy power, but also as then as a promoter of clean energy. Trump would very much stress the role of, or this idea of energy dominance, and to use the gas boom to really become a dominant force in energy markets. While in Obama times, and I mean, we'll see what happens with Biden, it was more framed again as like a transition to clean energy. So there's some overlap there, but difference in how what the vision looks like. And we've also seen, and it also leads to some differences on the role of CCS, carbon capture and storage, and this also then seen specifically in some of the international fora. So in the Clean Energy Ministerial, which was created by Obama to promote clean energy under U.S. leadership, was then sort of converted into, sorry, it says CCU, it should say CCS initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial by Trump. So they kind of pulled themselves out, not only of the Paris Agreement, but also out of some of these Clean Energy Ministerial processes, but created this CCS initiative. And of course, there's a big push to support LNG exports. So I know I didn't check the time when I started, but I'm kind of trying to go through this fairly quickly to make sure I keep in time. So so what are the implications? And this is sort of like where we're at and trying to think through all of this. What does all of this mean? What can we pull out of this analytically? Also for looking at developments at the international level, at the global level, in the further development of the global energy transition. So obviously there are contested definitions, or clean energy is contested as a term. It's not, it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. It also has led to disagreement. I mean, these different visions have led to disagreement and competition within global governance institutions. Especially under Trump, there were diverging positions that led to situations where communiques were not signed on by all, or were not all the parties signed on to the communiques. There's this competition also between IRENA and the IEA, where certain actors are heavily supporting IRENA, others are still more sort of aligned with the IEA. And then there's this emerging market, or I would say, of contesting visions that are on offer to developing and emerging countries, who then can sort of pick and choose from these visions and from this market to then decide who they want to partner with and shape their own energy policies. And that's kind of where we're at. I'll stop there, and I'll be curious to hear comments and suggestions on how to maybe proceed with this work. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I'm not sure how the session ends. If we are kicked out at 4 o'clock, that might happen. But in general, we still have some minutes for questions and remarks. If there are any, please post them in the chat. I was wondering, we have those contested visions. We cannot say one is wrong and one is false. They are just different, and we somehow have to deal with them. As the transition goes on, isn't it important to acknowledge that those visions are different, and that we just implement different kind of pathways to a clean energy transition in different countries?
So you're saying that we should acknowledge that there are different visions and that there will be different pathways towards sustainable energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly there will be different pathways. What we're kind of asking ourselves is, what do these visions in these big countries, in these major economies that are really dominating in a way the global energy transition and the fora internationally around that, how do they actually influence what happens in other countries, in third countries, and in these fora, and what role do these visions play? And of course, I thought it's quite interesting, obviously, to look also at the U.S. case, where there's this back and forth, and what does that mean for global governance and developments at the international level?
For sure, especially because I think this back and forth is something that can happen very easily in other countries as well. China has made huge changes in their vision for clean energy in the last couple of years. And as well, Germany will probably make different or take different positions. When you look at hydrogen technology, that's not a very efficient technology, and energy efficiency will maybe play a different role then. So how are you evaluating the influence it will have on the international level and other countries?
Yeah, I mean, we have looked at that a little bit, and I mean, one of the things I looked at is this the Chinese vision of a global grid. I don't know if people are aware of that. It's something that China has been quite well. They spent some energy and resources on this. It's not so well known, I think, but and Western governments basically just sort of laugh at it. They don't really take it seriously. And I think that's interesting that there's no that it hasn't really gained traction, at least not in these other among these other big players, but of course, like then there are certain players that do sign on here and there, and things move forward, and it will be interesting to see where China actually takes this and what this might imply for how energy transition processes evolve in these countries. Again, the same thing that I already said. I mean, clean energy ministerial kind of being reframed from a clean energy to a CCS ministerial by the Trump administration, which obviously changes the dynamics of what this fora is seeking to achieve. And then maybe I'll just also pick up what Jens put it here in the chat, like how are these things embedded in domestic politics? Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, they're very much sort of linked to what's going on domestically. In Germany, we've had this consensus emerge over time, which has translated into quite a strong also foreign policy on the energy transition. In the US, this has not been possible. And in China, it's interestingly, you have even though you have I think in China, it sort of like points to the fact that there's this disconnect sometimes between what the central government promotes as its official kind of discourse and party line, and what a lot of people assume then is a very heavy-handed kind of top-down approach to how China then implements, in this case, the energy transition in China. But then the reality of it is quite different, right? We have a lot more sort of contestation. It's just not overt in terms of like discourse that contests a certain vision coming from the central government, but it sort of it's manifested in the actions and the behavior of at the local level, by the grid operators, by the provincial governments, and the end result is this very mixed picture, right? We also see that now with the COVID-19 reactions. We've seen 2060 climate neutrality, okay? But at the same time, we have a huge sort of boom in coal power investment. Like, how does that kind of match up, right? It doesn't really. And this is then what we also see internationally, is that that there's no single actor that controls these things in China. But in the end, it's state-owned enterprises and so on that work together with the state-owned banks, the policy banks, to basically move forward coal power projects in a lot of these countries. And then I'll just read this last comment, and then probably our time is up, right?
Yes, some people are leasing already to Jazanov's.
Sorry.
No, we'll do it, because I think in the beginning it's like blah, 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 I'm Mr. Jazanov and blah. So we'll do one more comment, the one by Martin, maybe.
With comparison, Germany became successful with guidance on developing RNA as a common good. Why have you skipped this perspective? Okay.
I mean, you can answer it later in the chat to him, maybe, if you want, or you can now.
I didn't understand it. I don't understand the question.
Okay. Yeah. Then maybe later, and then just to wrap it up here and for the recording, thank you very much to the presenters, to all the comments and questions. Our goal was to put together different disciplinary perspectives, to have local and global perspectives that are thought-provoking with their similarities and differences. And we hope that we achieved that goal. And thank you very much for being here, for presenting, for asking questions, and we hope the discussions can go on in whatever format you can find.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Especially also hi to Jens again, or